Toby
You
Merrick had
stand
his
before me
entire
defying
upper
us.
body
My
wedged
queen,
into
I
an
meant no
access
offense.
panel
Your
that
intentions.
smelled faintly of
You stand
ozone,
before me
and somebody's
defying
forgotten
us.
lunch
queen,
when the
I meant no
ceremonial
offense.
music started.
Your intentions are
The
irrelevant.
holographic emitters, 17 of them, each supposedly calibrated to perfection by Celestia Prime's own technical staff, had been flickering like a bad fluorescent bulb for the past 3 hours. He traced the problem through 2 kilometers of quantum-threaded cable, past ceremonial fountains that ran on physics he didn't pretend to understand, and finally to this particular junction box that seemed to be suffering from what he could only describe as electronic indigestion. "Of course it's this one," he muttered, disconnecting a relay that sparked with indignation. "Of course it's the one directly under the platform where the Queen of Celestia Prime is about to present her daughter to the most important people in several star systems. Why would it be anywhere convenient?" The music swelled above him, something orchestral and deeply meaningful that was probably written by someone who'd been dead for 300 years and was very serious about minor keys. Toby had been on Celestia Prime for 8 months, long enough to recognize the difference between welcome ceremony music and "this is extremely important, so please be impressed" music. This was definitely the latter. He really should have stayed in his quarters. He'd been hired as a contract engineer, someone to maintain the human-designed equipment that Celestia Prime had purchased in bulk and then discovered was incompatible with every other piece of technology in the palace. His job description had been very clear: keep the equipment running, stay out of sight during important events, and for the love of all that's holy, don't accidentally create a diplomatic incident. 0 incidents so far, which Toby considered his primary achievement. The relay finally came free, and he examined it with the kind of attention usually reserved for ancient artifacts. "You're supposed to handle data transfer," he told it, "not attempt faster-than-light communication with your home planet." Above him, a voice began speaking in Celestian, the words flowing with a formal cadence that suggested they'd been written out and rehearsed. Toby didn't speak much Celestian beyond "hello, thank you, and I'm just here to fix the equipment," but he recognized Queen Thessara's voice. He'd heard it exactly twice before, once welcoming the human delegation, and once asking him directly if the atmospheric processors in the East Wing could possibly make less noise because they were disturbing her meditation. He'd managed to reduce the noise by 40%, which apparently qualified as a minor miracle. Toby pulled himself partially out of the access panel to grab his diagnostic scanner, catching a glimpse of the ceremony through the maintenance gap. The Grand Hall of Celestia Prime was doing its best to inspire awe and succeeding magnificently. Crystalline pillars rose toward a ceiling that displayed a real-time image of the planet's night sky, magnified and enhanced until individual stars seemed close enough to touch. Floating platforms held dignitaries from worlds Toby could name and several he couldn't, all of them dressed in what was clearly their most impressive formal wear. And there on the central platform stood Queen Thessara and her daughter. Toby had seen the Queen before, but always from a distance, always in passing. Up close, or as close as he could get while technically hiding under the stage, she was striking in a way that made his engineer's brain struggle for adequate specifications. Tall, poised, with long ears that swept back like sculptural elements someone had designed for maximum elegance, she wore something that looked like it had been woven from starlight and good intentions. And she held herself with the kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly who you were and never having questioned it. Princess Lyra stood beside her mother, and Toby felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. The kid looked profoundly uncomfortable. She was small, maybe 7 or 8 in human years, though Toby had no idea how Celestian aging worked, with the same elegant ears as her mother, but with a restlessness that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. She kept shifting her weight, looking at the assembled candidates with an expression that Toby recognized from every school assembly he'd ever been forced to attend. The relay in his hand beeped insistently, reminding him that he had a job to do, and it did not involve watching royal ceremonies. He ducked back into the access panel, reconnecting circuits and running diagnostics. The holographic emitters stabilized, their output evening into the smooth projection that would display whatever images the ceremony required. Toby allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another crisis averted, another day of not causing an interstellar incident. The ceremony continued above him. He heard the candidates being presented, each introduction followed by polite applause. Dr. Aldrich Pemberton of the Scholastic Circles, Scholar Seraphine Caldwell from the Archives of Remembered Wisdom, Ambassador Rosalind Whitmore, whose credentials I missed but who apparently represented significant political something or other. They all sounded impressively qualified in a way that made Toby deeply grateful he'd never had to be impressive in his life. He was just finishing the final calibration when the music stopped. Not a planned stop, not a graceful transition into the next part of the ceremony, just stopped. The kind of silence that felt like the universe holding its breath. Toby froze, diagnostic scanner halfway to the relay panel. Had he broken something? Had one of his repairs somehow catastrophically failed in a way that would definitely qualify as that diplomatic incident he'd been trying to avoid? Then he heard footsteps. Small ones, moving with purpose. He should have stayed hidden. He absolutely should have remained in his access panel, finished his work, and quietly retreated to his quarters, where he could safely exist without being perceived by anyone important. But human curiosity was apparently a universal constant, and Toby shifted position to peer through the maintenance gap. Princess Lyra was walking, not toward any of the candidates, not toward her mother. She descended from the central platform and was moving through the assembled dignitaries with a determination that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, even if no one else did. Queen Thesara's voice cut through the silence, speaking in Celestian. Even without understanding the words, Toby caught the tone, carefully controlled concern. Lyra didn't stop. She walked past Dr. Pemberton, who had frozen mid-bow, past Scholar Caldwell, whose three arms were still outstretched in formal greeting, past Ambassador Whitmore, whose expression suggested this was very much not part of the plan. She walked directly to the edge of the platform, right to where Toby's access panel opened onto the ceremonial floor. Their eyes met through the gap, and Toby felt his entire understanding of the universe tilt slightly sideways. The princess pointed at him, one small finger, absolutely certain, aimed directly at his face. "Him," she said in perfect, clear, standard. "I choose him." Toby's diagnostic scanner slipped from his fingers, hit the floor of the access panel, and made a sound like the universe's most poorly timed laugh track. The entire hall froze. Every dignitary, every candidate, every member of the royal court stood absolutely still, as if someone had paused reality and forgotten to press play again. Queen Thesara stared at her daughter with an expression Toby couldn't begin to interpret. The candidates stood like statues commemorating their own confusion. And Toby, still half-wedged into an access panel beneath the ceremonial stage, discovered that it was possible to experience every embarrassing moment of his life simultaneously, while a child he'd never officially met pointed at him with unwavering conviction. "Oh no," he whispered to himself, with the clarity of someone who just realized they were definitely, absolutely going to cause that diplomatic incident after all. The private chamber where Toby found himself 20 minutes later was the kind of room that made him acutely aware of his own fingerprints. Everything looked like it cost more than his entire education, and he'd spent 6 years at Technical University. The walls seemed to be made of something that was either very advanced glass or very patient light, and the furniture had the aggressive elegance of items that had never been sat upon by anyone wearing work boots. Queen Thesara sat across from him, her long ears angled in a way that Toby's panicking brain interpreted as either deep thought or barely restrained homicide. Probably the former. Hopefully the former. "So," she said, her standard precise and unaccented in a way that made Toby's own planetary drawl sound like he was chewing gravel, "You are Toby Merrick." "Yes, Your Majesty." Toby had looked up the proper forms of address during his frantic walk from the ceremonial hall, his personal data pad feeding him etiquette information like a student cramming for an exam he was already failing. "I'm a contract engineer with a—" "I know what you are." She leaned forward slightly, and Toby resisted the urge to lean back. "What I don't know is what you've done to influence my daughter's choice." "Nothing." The word came out too quickly, too defensively. Toby forced himself to breathe, to engage the part of his brain that could explain complex technical problems to people who thought quantum was just a fancy word for magic. "I mean, I've been on Celestia Prime for 8 months, and I've seen Princess Lyra maybe 5 times, 6 at most. Always at a distance. I've never spoken to her directly." Well, the Tsar's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested she was accessing information. probably through one of the neural interfaces that Celestian nobility used. Toby had read about them, direct brain-to-computer connections that made his datapad look like a child's toy. You repaired a music box in the Eastern Gardens 3 months ago. Toby blinked. Yes. One of the staff members asked if I could look at it. The internal mechanisms were Earth-manufactured, so the palace technicians couldn't work on it. Was that Princess Lyra's music box? It was a gift from her grandmother, Thesara said, her tone softening microscopically. It had been broken for 2 years. You fixed it in 17 minutes. The timing mechanism was just misaligned, Toby said, then caught himself. Not that it was simple. I mean, it was a beautiful piece of engineering, very delicate work. I just meant, he stopped before he could dig the hole any deeper. You also helped Servant Kelly carry supply crates from the loading bay to the storage facilities. Twice. Well, yes, but that's just, he was struggling and I was there and I had hands that weren't currently holding anything important. You showed my daughter how a maintenance drone navigates corridors. Toby's memory supplied the incident. A small figure watching from a doorway while he'd programmed a drone to avoid a section of damaged flooring. He'd explained the navigation algorithms out loud, the way he always did when working through a problem. He hadn't realized anyone was listening. I thought she was just a palace resident, he said weakly. I didn't know she was, I knew intellectually that the princess existed, but I'd never seen official images, and she wasn't wearing anything that screamed royalty, and he stopped himself before he could dig the hole any deeper. I wasn't trying to influence anyone, Your Majesty. I was just doing my job and apparently talking to myself more than is socially acceptable. For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across Thesara's face. You talk to your equipment. It helps me think through problems, Toby defended. And sometimes the equipment talks back in the form of error codes and catastrophic failures, so it's really more of a dialogue. My daughter has been watching you, Thesara said, standing and moving to a window that overlooked the palace gardens. Toby could see the eastern section from here, where he'd fixed that music box while muttering about whoever had designed the spring tension system. My security detail reports that she's asked about you 17 times in the past month. What you were doing, why you talked to machines. Whether all humans were like that. Toby processed this information with the growing certainty that he'd somehow stumbled into a situation that no amount of technical training had prepared him for. Like what, precisely? Thesara turned back to him, and her expression was unreadable. She said you were present in a way that others weren't. I asked her to elaborate, and she said that when you fix things, you pay attention to them like they matter. Things do matter, Toby said, confused. If you don't pay attention, you miss the actual problem and just treat symptoms, and then everything breaks again in 3 weeks. She also said, Thesara paused, and for a moment she looked less like a queen and more like a mother trying to understand her child. She said you look at people the same way you look at broken things, like you're trying to understand what they need to work properly again. Toby felt heat creeping up his neck. I'm not trying to fix people. That would be incredibly presumptuous. She meant it as a compliment, Mr. Merrick. The silence stretched between them, filled with implications that Toby was desperately trying not to think about. Outside the chamber, he could hear raised voices, the rejected candidates probably. The carefully selected tutors and companions who'd spent years preparing for this moment, only to watch an 8-year-old choose the equipment technician. Dr. Pemberton is threatening to file a formal protest, Thesara said, confirming Toby's suspicion. He has 3 doctoral degrees and came recommended by the scholastic circles themselves. His scholar Caldwell has devoted 2 years to studying Celestian royal educational traditions, Toby added, because apparently he couldn't stop himself from making things worse. Ambassador Whitmore represents a crucial political alliance with the Outer Territories. And I represent a very confused human who's good with wiring, Toby finished. Your Majesty, I understand that obviously this is unprecedented and probably causing all kinds of diplomatic issues. And I would completely understand if you just told Princess Lyra that she needs to choose again from the actual qualified candidates. I could do that, Thesara said, returning to her seat. Her movements carried the weight of someone making calculations that Toby couldn't begin to follow. I could explain to my daughter that her choice, while touching, was inappropriate. That childhood instincts cannot override years of careful political consideration. Toby nodded, relief flooding through him. This made sense. This was logical. He could go back to his quarters, return to his actual job, and eventually laugh about the time he accidentally became part of a royal selection ceremony. However, Thesera continued, and Toby's relief evaporated like water on a hot relay. Publicly rejecting my daughter's choice would shame her. In Celestian culture, the selection ceremony is meant to honor the child's agency, their ability to perceive qualities that adults might overlook. If I override her decision immediately, I suggest that I don't trust her judgment. But she's 8, Toby said, then immediately regretted it. I mean, not that 8-year-olds can't have good judgment, but this is choosing a royal companion, not picking a favorite color. But she's 8, actually, and she chose you with more certainty than I've seen her display about anything in her entire life. Thesera's long ears tilted forward, a gesture Toby was beginning to recognize as intense focus. So here is what I propose, Mr. Merrick. A trial period. 1 month. You will serve as my daughter's companion while the traditional candidates remain on standby. At the end of that month, we will evaluate whether her unhesitating choice had merit or whether it was simply childish impulse. Toby's mouth opened, but his brain had apparently vacated the premises. But I don't know anything about being a royal companion. I don't know Celestian history or protocol or educational philosophy or... You know how to fix things, Thesera interrupted, and Toby scrambled to stand as she rose. And according to my daughter, you know how to pay attention. For the next month, that will have to be enough. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Merrick. The music box you repaired, my daughter listens to it every night before sleep. She told me it sounds better than when it was new, because whoever fixed it understood what the music wanted to be. Thesera's expression softened into something that might have been a smile. Machines don't want to be anything, of course. But children notice when someone approaches the world with care rather than assumption. Perhaps that's what she saw when she pointed at you. The door opened, revealing a corridor and the distant sound of ongoing arguments. Toby stood alone in the elegant chamber, surrounded by expensive light and patient furniture, trying to process how his life had just been completely derailed by an 8-year-old's unhesitating finger. His datapad chimed with a new message. Assignment updated. Report to Princess Lyra's educational suite tomorrow. 0800 station time. Bring diagnostic tools. Of course, bring diagnostic tools, Toby muttered to the empty room. Because if I'm going to cause a diplomatic incident, I might as well have the proper equipment. But before he could fully process the absurdity of his situation, the door chimed again. This time it admitted 2 figures who radiated academic authority like some people radiated cologne. Dr. Aldrich Pemberton entered first. He was tall, even by Celestian standards, with long ears that had been decorated with golden rings that probably signified academic achievement. His 3 doctoral degrees were apparently visible in the way he carried himself. Chin elevated just slightly, movements precise and deliberate, every gesture suggesting he was thinking several steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Behind him came scholar Seraphine Caldwell, and Toby's brain briefly stuttered at the alienness of her. 3 arms moved in unconscious harmony, each holding a datapad or gesturing to emphasize points she wasn't yet making. Her multiple eyes, Toby counted 6, arranged in 2 rows across a face that was simultaneously beautiful and profoundly other, tracked him with the intensity of someone conducting a comprehensive assessment. Mr. Merrick, Dr. Pemberton said, his voice carrying the kind of polished formality that came from years of lecturing to captive audiences, we need to discuss the irregularity of this situation. I didn't ask for this, Toby said immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I was just fixing holographic projectors. I had no idea the princess even knew who I was. Nevertheless, Scholar Caldwell interjected, her voice carrying a harmonic quality that made every word sound like it was being sung by a small choir. You are now the primary candidate for a position that we have spent years preparing to fill. You understand our concern. I understand that you're infinitely more qualified than I am, Toby said honestly. I have no formal training in education, no knowledge of Celestian culture beyond what I've picked up in 8 months, and my primary skill set involves explaining to malfunctioning equipment why it needs to cooperate. Precisely, Dr. Pemberton said, pouncing on this admission like it proved his point. You are fundamentally unsuited for the role of royal companion. Princess Lyra requires instruction in classical literature, philosophical traditions, diplomatic protocols, advanced mathematics. I failed calculus twice, Toby interrupted. So if that's on the curriculum, I'm definitely the wrong person. This isn't a joke, Mr. Merrick, Scholar Caldwell said, though her tone was less hostile than Pemberton's. Royal companions are chosen through careful deliberation precisely because the position shapes the future leader's worldview. What Princess Lyra learns in the next few years will determine how she approaches governance, diplomacy, cultural understanding. And you think I'm going to teach her to govern by talking to equipment? Toby asked. We think, Dr. Pemberton said coldly, that you represent a disruption to centuries of carefully refined educational methodology. Queen Thesara may have agreed to this trial period, but make no mistake, we will be documenting every interaction, every lesson, every failure to meet established pedagogical standards. When this month is over, there will be a comprehensive evaluation, and unless you demonstrate competencies you clearly don't possess, Princess Lyra will choose again. Properly, this time. Okay, Toby said, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. That's it? Scholar Caldwell's multiple eyes blinked in what might have been surprise. No defense of your qualifications? No argument that you deserve this opportunity? I don't deserve this opportunity, Toby said. An 8-year-old pointed at me for reasons I don't understand, and now I have 30 days to figure out what those reasons are. I'm not going to waste energy defending qualifications I don't have. I'm just going to show up and pay attention and try not to make things worse. Dr. Pemberton's ears tilted back. Irritation, Toby was learning, but before he could respond, Scholar Caldwell raised one of her 3 hands. Perhaps, she said slowly, that's not the worst approach. Mr. Merrick, Dr. Pemberton and I will remain available as supplementary educators. We'll provide Princess Lyra with the theoretical frameworks and historical context she requires. You, she paused as if searching for words that wouldn't sound insulting. You will provide whatever it is that made her choose you. Perhaps between all of us, we can ensure her education doesn't suffer from this unconventional arrangement. I can live with that, Toby said. See that you do, Dr. Pemberton replied. Because if Princess Lyra fails to demonstrate adequate progress at the end of this month, the responsibility will fall on you, not on the educational methodologies you're disrupting. They left together and Toby found himself alone again, staring at the message on his data pad. Report to Princess Lyra's educational suite tomorrow, 0800 station time. He had 16 hours to figure out what an 8-year-old princess had seen in a man who talked to broken equipment. The next morning arrived with the inevitability of gravity and bad decisions. Toby stood outside Princess Lyra's educational suite at precisely 0800 station time, carrying his diagnostic toolkit because the instructions had been clear, and also because it was the only thing he felt remotely confident about. The door opened before he could knock, revealing a space that was somehow both intimidating and inviting. Large windows overlooked the palace gardens, flooding the room with natural light that made the crystalline walls glow softly. Shelves lined one wall, filled with what looked like actual books made of actual paper, a luxury that Toby hadn't seen since he'd left Earth. A low table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by cushions that seemed designed for someone significantly shorter than him. And at that table sat Princess Lyra, working on something with the kind of focused intensity that Toby recognized from his own work. She looked up when he entered, and her face split into a grin that made Toby feel simultaneously better and worse about the entire situation. You came, she said in standard, her accent carrying the musical quality of native Celestian. Mother said you might not. Your mother was very persuasive, Toby said, setting his toolkit down carefully on a shelf that probably cost more than his annual salary. So, hello, I'm Toby. We've never officially met, even though apparently you've been watching me fix things. You talked to the equipment, Lyra said, like this was the most fascinating thing in the universe. Why? It helps me think. Toby moved closer to the table where Lyra had been working. When I explain the problem out loud, sometimes I hear the solution. Plus, if I'm going to spend 3 hours arguing with a relay circuit, I might as well be polite about it. Lyra laughed, a sound that seemed too large for her small frame. The equipment talks back? In the form of error codes and catastrophic failures, yeah. It's a very combative relationship. I like that, Lyra said. She gestured to the table where she'd been assembling what looked like a three-dimensional puzzle made of crystalline pieces. I've been working on this for 3 weeks. Master Caldwell says I'm not understanding the fundamental principles, but I think it's just broken. Toby examined the puzzle, his engineer's eye immediately spotting the issue. The pieces were designed to fit together, but Lyra had been trying to force connections that assumed Euclidean geometry when the puzzle clearly required something else. It's not broken, he said, picking up 2 pieces that she'd been struggling with. See this piece? You're trying to fit it into Euclidean space, but the connection points suggest non-Euclidean geometry. If you rotate it along this axis, he demonstrated, and the pieces slid together with a satisfying click. It works in curved space. Lyra stared at the connected pieces, then at Toby, then back at the pieces. Master Caldwell said I wasn't understanding the fundamental principles. Master Caldwell probably assumed you were approaching it wrong instead of asking what approach you were actually using, Toby said, then immediately caught himself. Not that I'm criticizing Master Caldwell. I'm sure she's very qualified, and I'm just a technician who just helped me solve something in 30 seconds that I've been stuck on for 3 weeks, Lyra interrupted, her long ears tilted forward in that expression of intense focus he'd seen in her mother. Everyone looks at me like I'm a puzzle to solve, like if they study me enough, they'll figure out the right answer. You just help me with the actual puzzle. Toby sat down on one of the cushions, which was either too soft or exactly the right amount of soft, and he couldn't decide which. Is that why you chose me in the ceremony? Because I helped you with a music box once? I chose you because you're not pretending, Lyra said with the blunt honesty that only 8-year-olds could pull off. Everyone else who came to be my companion was pretending to be what they thought I wanted. You were just fixing holographic projectors and complaining about relay circuits. I do complain about relay circuits a lot, Toby admitted. They're designed by people who've never had to actually repair them. See, that's honest. Lyra pulled another puzzle from a nearby shelf, this one involving floating magnetic spheres. Can you teach me how things work? Real things, not just what's in the official educational databases. I can teach you how to fix things, Toby said carefully. I don't know about royal education requirements or diplomatic protocols or... The door chimed and Dr. Pemberton entered without waiting for acknowledgement. He carried a data pad and an expression that suggested he'd been practicing his disapproval in the mirror. Princess Lyra, he said, bowing precisely, I've come to continue your studies in classical literature and philosophical traditions. I understand there's been a temporary arrangement, but your education cannot be neglected. Lyra's expression went carefully neutral, and Toby recognized the look of a kid who'd been lectured at extensively. Toby was teaching me about non-Euclidean geometry, she said. Was he? Dr. Pemberton's tone could have frozen hydrogen. How fascinating. And what are Mr. Merrick's qualifications in advanced mathematics? I failed calculus twice in university, Toby said cheerfully, deciding that if he was going to cause a diplomatic incident, he might as well be honest about it. But I can explain how things work in practice, which is different from theory, but occasionally useful. The princess requires instruction in theory, Dr. Pemberton said, the foundations of knowledge, not mere mechanical application. Why, Brian? Lyra asked. Dr. Pemberton blinked. I beg your pardon? Why do I need theory if I don't understand how it applies? Lyra held up the spatial mathematics puzzle. Master Caldwell spent 3 weeks explaining geometric principles, but I didn't understand until Toby showed me how the pieces actually fit together. Because theory provides the framework for application, Dr. Pemberton said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. Without theoretical grounding, the framework is just words, Lyra interrupted, and Toby heard an edge in her voice that suggested she'd been holding this back for a while. You keep telling me what I should know, but nobody asks what I want to understand. Dr. Pemberton's long ears tilted back sharply. With respect, Princess, an 8-year-old cannot determine the scope of her own education. That requires expertise, planning, and nobody asked me, Lyra said, standing. It didn't make her much taller, but somehow made her presence more commanding. You prepared for 2 years to teach me. Did you ever wonder what I wanted to learn? The silence that followed made Toby wish he could sink through the floor and hide in the maintenance tunnels where life made sense and nobody had doctoral degrees in philosophical traditions. I prepared, Dr. Pemberton said stiffly, a comprehensive curriculum based on centuries of royal educational precedent. Toby asked me what I was working on, Lyra said, her voice quiet but absolute. That's the difference, Doctor. Pemberton looked at Toby with an expression that suggested he was recalculating several life choices. You've been here one day, and you're already undermining established pedagogical methodology. I fixed a puzzle, Toby said, surprised by his own courage. I'm not trying to undermine anything. I don't have a curriculum or a philosophy or even a plan beyond show up and see what happens. But maybe that's not the worst starting point. It's pedagogically irresponsible. It's honest, Lyra repeated, and Toby realized she'd latched onto that word like it meant something important. The door chimed again, and Scholar Caldwell entered, her 3 arms carrying data pads and what looked like holographic projection equipment. She stopped when she saw Dr. Pemberton, then Toby, then Lyra standing like she was defending territory. I had scheduled time to review Princess Lyra's work on the spatial mathematics assessment, Caldwell said, her harmonic voice carrying careful neutrality. Has there been a problem? She completed it, Toby said, gesturing to the assembled puzzle. Well, we completed it together. She was approaching it correctly. She just needed someone to confirm that curved space was the right framework. Caldwell moved closer, examining the puzzle with her multiple eyes. This is actually correct. The princess has been struggling with this concept for weeks. Because you kept telling me I was wrong, Lyra said, and Toby heard genuine frustration there. You never asked me to explain what I was thinking. You just said I didn't understand the principles. I was attempting to guide you toward the correct methodology, Caldwell said, but there was uncertainty in her harmonic voice now. By telling her she was failing instead of asking where she was stuck, Toby said, then immediately regretted it because now both Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell were looking at him like he'd just insulted their entire professional existence. Mr. Merrick, Caldwell said carefully, you appear to be operating under the assumption that education is simply a matter of asking questions and providing answers. True pedagogy requires structure, assessment, carefully planned progression through. I'm sure it does, Toby agreed. And I'm sure you're both incredibly qualified, and I'm just a technician who fixes broken equipment. But maybe, and I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe before we worry about methodology and progression, we could ask Lyra what she actually wants to know. 3 sets of long ears swiveled toward him, and Toby wondered if this was what prey felt like right before something large and efficient ate it. What I want to know, Lyra said into the silence, is why everyone treats learning like it's supposed to hurt. Like if I'm not struggling and confused, I'm not really understanding. Toby explained curved space in 30 seconds, and I got it. Why did it take everyone else 3 weeks of telling me I was wrong, Doctor? Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell exchanged glances, and Toby saw something shift in their expressions. Not acceptance, but maybe the beginning of uncertainty. Perhaps, Caldwell said slowly, we should discuss pedagogical approaches with Queen Thesara present. This is clearly a more complex situation than anticipated. They filed out, leaving Toby and Lyra alone in the educational suite. Lyra sat back down at her table, picked up the magnetic sphere puzzle, and looked at Toby with an expression that was part triumph and part anxiety. Did I just make everything worse? Probably, Toby said honestly, but you ask good questions, and that's usually where fixing things starts. Lyra smiled, a small thing but genuine, and began arranging the magnetic spheres. Can you teach me how the magnetic fields interact? Not the theory, just how they actually work. Toby pulled out his data pad, called up a field visualization program, and settled in to explain. Outside, he could hear Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell having an intense discussion about educational philosophy and unprecedented disruptions and the importance of maintaining standards. They're going to hate me, Toby said. They're going to have to get used to you, Lyra corrected. I chose you. That means something. Toby hoped she was right and began explaining magnetic field lines while a princess watched with the kind of attention he usually only got from equipment that was about to catastrophically fail. It was only his first day, and he'd already disrupted centuries of educational tradition. The next 29 days were going to be interesting. The educational suite felt different on the second morning. Toby arrived early, diagnostic toolkit in hand out of pure habit, and found Princess Lyra already seated at the low table. She'd assembled 3 different puzzles in front of her, each one partially completed, each one abandoned at what looked like the exact moment of frustration. "Couldn't sleep?" Toby asked, setting his toolkit down carefully on a shelf that probably cost more than his entire apartment back on Earth. Lyra looked up, and he saw shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "Scholar Caldwell sent me practice assessments for the formal evaluation at the end of the month. I," she gestured at the puzzles, "I can't make my brain work the way the assessments want it to work." Toby moved closer, examining the 3 puzzles: magnetic field mapping, orbital mechanics visualization, quantum state probability matrices. Each one had been approached from an angle that was technically correct, but completely unconventional. "Show me how you're thinking about this one," he said, pointing to the orbital mechanics puzzle. "That's the problem. Master Caldwell says I'm not thinking about it correctly." "I didn't ask what Master Caldwell says. I asked how you're thinking about it." Lyra's long ears tilted forward, surprised attention. She pulled the orbital mechanics puzzle closer. "Everyone teaches that you calculate trajectories by measuring velocity and gravitational force. But that's not how it works in my head. I see it like," she paused, struggling for words, "like music. Different orbits have different rhythms. If you match the rhythms, the math just follows." Toby sat down across from her, the cushion conforming to his shape in ways that felt either very advanced or mildly disturbing. "That's called harmonic resonance. It's actually a legitimate approach to orbital mechanics. Earth engineers use it for satellite constellations." "They do?" "Absolutely. Your brain isn't working wrong, Lyra. It's working in a framework that nobody's bothered to recognize." He rotated the puzzle, showing her how her musical approach aligned with mathematical principles. "The problem isn't you. It's the assessment, assuming there's only one right way to think." The door chimed. Dr. Pemberton entered without waiting for acknowledgement, his long ears decorated with golden rings that caught the morning light. He carried a data pad and an expression that suggested he'd been practicing his disapproval in the mirror. "Princess Lyra," he said, bowing precisely, "I've come to continue your instruction in classical literature analysis. We were examining the philosophical implications of the Celestian poet Morav's work on consciousness and identity." His gaze slid to Toby. "I trust Mr. Merrick won't object to observing proper educational methodology." Toby started to stand, to give them space, but Lyra's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Toby was helping me understand orbital mechanics through music." Dr. Pemberton's ears tilted back. "Music and mathematics are separate disciplines, Princess. Conflating them leads to conceptual confusion." "Does it?" Toby heard himself say. "Or does it lead to different ways of understanding the same concepts?" "Mr. Merrick, you are here on trial. I suggest you observe rather than critique methods refined over centuries." Lyra's grip on Toby's wrist tightened. He could feel her pulse, rapid and anxious. This was the moment. He could back down, defer to authority, play it safe. Or he could do what he'd been chosen to do, even if he had no idea what that actually was. "With respect, Dr. Pemberton, I'm not here to observe. I'm here because Princess Lyra chose me. And she chose me because I asked questions instead of providing answers." He looked at Lyra. "So here's my question. Do you want to study Morav's poetry right now?" The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff made of social convention and centuries of protocol. "No," Lyra said quietly, then louder. "No, I want to understand why nobody's bothered to recognize that my brain works differently but not wrong." Dr. Pemberton's expression could have flash-frozen hydrogen. "The purpose of education is to train the mind to think correctly, not to indulge every passing whim of how a child prefers to process information." "But what if there are multiple correct ways to think?" Toby asked. "What if insisting on one methodology isn't education, it's just conformity?" This is precisely the kind of undisciplined thinking that That got her to solve in 90 seconds a puzzle she'd been stuck on for 3 weeks, Toby interrupted. Yeah, terrible outcome. Really should avoid that. Lyra made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. Dr. Pemberton looked between them with an expression of someone watching a carefully constructed tower begin to tilt. 1 month, Dr. Pemberton said finally. You have 1 month to prove this approach has merit. I will be documenting everything. He turned to Lyra. Princess, I will return this afternoon for your literature instruction. Please be prepared to discuss Morav's third contemplation on the nature of persistence through change. He left with the kind of dignified exit that somehow felt like a threat. He's going to make you fail, Lyra whispered. Probably, Toby agreed, but we're not trying to make him happy. We're trying to figure out how you actually learn. So, orbital mechanics through harmonic resonance. Show me what you hear. The days blurred together in a pattern that Toby was only beginning to recognize. Mornings with Lyra, working through problems that she approached in ways that made conventional sense look boring. Afternoons with Dr. Pemberton or Scholar Caldwell, observing, documenting, occasionally intervening with corrections that usually missed the point. Evenings alone in his quarters, wondering if he was actually helping or just enabling an 8-year-old's resistance to proper education. By day 5, the pattern shifted. Scholar Seraphine Caldwell arrived carrying 3 data pads and an expression that suggested she was about to deliver disappointing news with maximum pedagogical efficiency. Her 3 arms moved in unconscious harmony as she set up a holographic display in the center of the educational suite. Princess Lyra, she said, her harmonic voice carrying gentle authority. Today we're evaluating your understanding of non-Euclidean spatial transformations. Please solve these 5 problems using the standard methodology we've practiced. Toby watched from his position near the window. He'd learned over the past 4 days that Scholar Caldwell genuinely cared about education. She wasn't cruel or dismissive. She was just absolutely, completely convinced that 200 years of teaching methodology couldn't possibly be wrong. Lyra looked at the first problem, looked at Toby, looked back at the holographic display. I can solve these, she said carefully, but not using the standard methodology. Scholar Caldwell's 3 arms went still. The standard methodology is standard because it works, Princess. It provides a framework that ensures consistent, replicable results. But I can get consistent, replicable results using curved space interpretation instead of the Euclidean transformations you taught me. Well, the assessment specifically requires solving the problems, Toby interjected. Does it mandate the methodology or just the correct answer? Scholar Caldwell turned to him, all 3 arms now holding data pads in what might have been an unconscious defensive posture. Mr. Merrick, the methodology is how we verify understanding. Anyone can guess at answers. True comprehension requires demonstrating proper mental frameworks. Orthar, Toby said, moving closer to the holographic display. True comprehension requires solving the problem in whatever way makes sense to the individual mind. Lyra, show us your approach. Lyra stood, moved to the display, and began manipulating the holographic elements. Her hands moved quickly, confidently, rotating spatial dimensions in ways that made Toby's engineer brain hurt, but clearly followed an internal logic. Within 2 minutes, she'd solved all 5 problems. Scholar Caldwell examined the solutions, her multiple eyes widening slightly. These are correct, all of them, but the process is completely wrong. The process is different, Toby corrected. Not wrong, different. In education, Mr. Merrick, different and wrong are often the same thing. If Princess Lyra cannot articulate the standard frameworks, she will fail formal evaluations. She will fail diplomatic assessments. She will fail to be what you want her to be, Lyra interrupted. Her voice was quiet but carried an edge that made both adults stop. That's what you mean, isn't it? I'll fail to be the kind of student who thinks the way you think and learns the way you learned and proves that your methods work. Scholar Caldwell's harmonic voice lost some of its musical quality. Princess, I have spent 40 years developing pedagogical approaches specifically designed for royal education. These methods have produced 17 generations of successfully educated Celestian leaders. And how many of them, Lyra asked, her long ears tilted forward in a way that reminded Toby of her mother, actually enjoyed learning? The question landed like a small bomb in a very quiet room. Scholar Caldwell opened her mouth, closed it. Her three arms lowered the datapad slowly. That's not the relevant metric. Why not? Toby asked. If the goal is lifelong learning, doesn't enjoyment of the process matter? Or is the goal just passing assessments? The goal is ensuring Princess Lyra has the foundational knowledge required for her future responsibilities, which she's acquiring, Toby pointed out, just not in the order or manner you expected. Scholar Caldwell looked at Lyra for a long moment. You're learning, yes, faster than I've seen in years, actually, but you cannot articulate theoretical foundations. When the Meridian delegation arrives at the end of the month, you'll need to demonstrate not just practical application, but deep theoretical understanding. Your unconventional approaches won't satisfy formal diplomatic evaluation. Then maybe, Lyra said, and Toby heard steel in her 8-year-old voice. The formal diplomatic evaluation is measuring the wrong things. Scholar Caldwell gathered her datapads. We'll see, Princess. In 25 days, we'll see if your confidence in alternative methodologies survives contact with reality. After she left, Lyra sat down heavily on one of the cushions. She's right, isn't she? I can solve problems, but I can't explain them the way the assessments want. I'm going to embarrass Mother in front of the entire Meridian delegation. Toby sat beside her. Or you're going to show them something they've never seen before. Someone who understands deeply enough to apply knowledge in new ways instead of just repeating what they've been told. You don't know that. You're just hoping. Yeah, Toby admitted. I am. But I'm hoping based on watching you solve 5 problems in 2 minutes that would take most people an hour. That's not luck, Lyra. That's genuine understanding, even if it doesn't fit Scholar Caldwell's framework. Lyra leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so unconsciously trusting that Toby felt the weight of responsibility settle like a physical thing. What if you're wrong? Then I'm wrong and we figure it out together. But I don't think I am. Outside the window, Celestia Prime's twin moons were rising over the palace gardens, painting everything in shades of silver and pale blue. Toby thought about music boxes and equipment that talked back and an 8-year-old who'd pointed at him without hesitation. Tomorrow, he said, I want to try something. Instead of me teaching you, I want you to teach me how you think. Really break it down. Because I think the problem isn't that you can't articulate your understanding. The problem is that nobody's ever asked you to articulate it in your own language first. My own language? The music, the rhythms, the way your brain actually processes this stuff. Teach me that, and maybe together we can figure out how to translate it into something the assessments will recognize. Lyra pulled back, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You really think that will work? I think, Toby said carefully, that you chose me for a reason. And I'm starting to think the reason is that I'm just barely smart enough to get out of your way and let you show everyone what you actually understand. By day 7, the confrontation Toby had been dreading and arrived with the inevitability of gravity and bad decisions. Dr. Pemberton had requested a formal review session with all 3 educators present. Toby arrived to find the educational suite rearranged, the comfortable cushions replaced with formal seating, the windows dimmed to provide optimal lighting for the holographic assessment displays that now dominated the center of the room. Lyra sat in what could only be described as a witness chair, small and isolated, while Dr. Pemberton, Scholar Caldwell, and Ambassador Rosalind Whitmore occupied elevated positions that made the whole thing feel like a trial, which Toby realized it was. Mr. Merrick, Ambassador Whitmore said, her Earth-human features arranged in diplomatic neutrality that somehow felt more hostile than open anger. Please sit. We need to discuss Princess Lyra's progress, or lack thereof. Toby sat in the chair next to Lyra, deliberately lowering himself to her level instead of taking the elevated educator position that had been left empty. Dr. Pemberton activated the first holographic display. Over the past week, we've conducted 14 separate assessments across 7 subject areas. Princess Lyra has demonstrated practical problem-solving ability, but has failed to articulate proper theoretical foundations in 12 of 14 cases. He manipulated the display, showing graphs that look damning in their red trending lines. By traditional metrics, she is regressing. By traditional metrics, Toby said, you're measuring the wrong things. We're measuring, Scholar Caldwell interjected, her 3 arms gesturing at the data, The same competencies we've measured for 2 centuries of royal education. These metrics exist for a reason. They exist because they're easy to measure, Toby countered, not because they're meaningful. Ambassador Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Merrick, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but charm doesn't prepare a future diplomatic representative for the realities of interstellar politics. In 3 weeks, the Meridian delegation arrives. They will expect Princess Lyra to demonstrate comprehensive understanding of trade economics, cultural protocols, and strategic thinking. Can she do that? Toby looked at Lyra. Can you? Not, Lyra said quietly, the way they want me to. But can you demonstrate understanding in your own way? I think so, yes. Dr. Pemberton made a sound of frustration. This is precisely the problem. Your own way is not how formal diplomatic presentations work. There are protocols, established frameworks, expected methodologies. And how many of those protocols, Lyra interrupted, standing up, were created by 8-year-olds? The 3 educators went silent. Lyra's small frame somehow commanded the room despite being dwarfed by the formal setting. You keep telling me I'm not understanding things correctly, but when Toby asked me to explain my thinking, I can. When he asks what I'm trying to accomplish, I can show him. The problem isn't that I don't understand. The problem is that you're all so busy trying to make me think like you that nobody's bothered to ask how I actually think. Princess, Scholar Caldwell said, her harmonic voice gentle, we're trying to give you the tools you'll need for your future. By telling me my tools are wrong, Lyra's ears were fully forward now, her 8-year-old voice carrying a clarity that made Toby's chest tight. Master Caldwell, you told me I didn't understand geometric principles because I used curved space when you expected Euclidean transformations. But I got the right answers. I solved problems you said were too advanced for my age. I did exactly what you asked me to do, just not the way you wanted me to do it. And instead of asking me to teach you my approach, you told me I was failing. She turned to Dr. Pemberton. You've spent 2 years preparing to teach me classical literature, but you never asked what stories I actually want to read. You never asked what questions I have about Murav's poetry. You just tell me what I should think about it and then get frustrated when I don't think the same way. The room felt like all the air had been replaced with something heavier. And Ambassador Whitmore, Lyra continued, facing the human diplomat, you're worried I'll embarrass Mother in front of the Meridian delegation, but you're measuring my ability to impress people by how well I can pretend to think like everyone expects me to think. Is that really what diplomatic success means? Performing someone else's understanding instead of demonstrating my own? Ambassador Whitmore opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Princess, with all due respect, you're 8 years old. You don't yet understand the complexities of... I'm 8 years old, Lyra agreed, and everyone in this room has been treating that like a problem to overcome instead of just who I am right now. Toby's the only person who's asked me what I want to learn instead of telling me what I should already know. She looked at Toby, and he saw something in her expression that was equal parts plea and challenge. So I'm asking all of you, can you stop trying to make me fail your tests and start trying to understand what I actually know? The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder. Dr. Pemberton was the first to speak. Princess, the trial period exists to evaluate Mr. Merrick's methodology, not to fundamentally restructure centuries of... Then maybe, Lyra said, her voice shaking now but not backing down. The trial period is evaluating the wrong thing. She walked out, just stood up, walked to the door, and left the 3 educators and Toby sitting in stunned silence. Toby started to follow her, but Scholar Caldwell's voice stopped him. Mr. Merrick, sit. He sat. Scholar Caldwell's 3 arms moved in agitated patterns. In 40 years of teaching, I have never had a student directly challenge pedagogical methodology. Maybe, Toby said quietly, that's the problem, Doctor. Pemberton stood, his long ears tilted back in profound irritation. You've been here 1 week and you're already undermining established educational foundations. Do you have any idea how much damage? I watched her solve 5 advanced geometry problems in 2 minutes, Toby interrupted. I watched her develop cargo optimization algorithms that would impress Earth University professors. I watched her teach me harmonic resonance approaches to orbital mechanics that I'd never considered. The only damage I see is the damage done by insisting there's only one right way to understand things. Ambassador Whitmore stood as well. Gentlemen, Scholar Caldwell, the issue isn't methodological philosophy. The issue is practical reality. In 23 days, Princess Lyra must present to the Meridian delegation. Can she or can't she? She can, Toby said. How do you know? Because she understands the material deeply enough to teach it in ways you've never seen. That's not failure of comprehension. That's mastery. Mastery, Dr. Pemberton said coldly, is demonstrable through established assessment frameworks, not through unconventional approaches that may or may not satisfy diplomatic observers. Then maybe we need to change what we're demonstrating, Toby said, standing to face all three of them. Lyra didn't choose me because I have doctorates or 40 years of experience or diplomatic credentials. She chose me because I pay attention to what things actually need instead of what I think they should need. So here's what I'm asking. Give us 2 more weeks. Let me work with her my way. Then assess her however you want. If she fails your standards, I'll leave. But if she succeeds, if she demonstrates genuine, deep understanding, even if it doesn't look like what you expected, then maybe you consider that your standards are measuring the wrong things. The 3 educators exchanged glances. 2 weeks, Ambassador Whitmore said finally. But Mr. Merrick, understand something. If Princess Lyra fails that diplomatic presentation, it's not just her confidence that suffers. It's Celestia Prime's relationship with the Meridian Coalition. Political alliances matter. Can you live with that responsibility? Toby thought about an 8-year-old walking out of a formal evaluation because she was tired of being told her understanding was wrong. Thought about music boxes and maintenance drones and the way Lyra's face lit up when someone finally asked her to explain her thinking instead of reciting someone else's. Yeah, he said, I can live with it. Because I think the real failure would be teaching her that understanding only counts if it looks like everyone else's understanding. The next week passed in a blur of work that felt both exhausting and exhilarating. Toby watched as something remarkable happened. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell, faced with the reality that Lyra genuinely understood complex concepts even if she couldn't articulate them traditionally, began actually listening to her explanations instead of correcting them. You keep using musical metaphors for orbital mechanics, Dr. Pemberton said on day 10, his frustration evident, but his tone less dismissive than before. Why? Because that's how I hear it, Lyra explained, her hands moving as she tried to make him understand. Different orbits have different rhythms. When the rhythms match, the gravitational forces balance. It's like harmony. When voices harmonize, they're following mathematical relationships even if the singers don't know the math. Orbits are the same. They're following mathematical relationships that sound like music in my head. Dr. Pemberton was quiet for a moment, then, that's called harmonic resonance. It's actually a legitimate physical principle. If you're going to use it in your presentation, you'll need to reference the theoretical foundations so the Meridian delegation understands you're not just making metaphors, you're describing actual physics. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start. Scholar Caldwell proved more adaptable. On day 11, she sat with Lyra for 3 hours, asking question after question about how Lyra processed information. Not correcting, just listening, understanding. You genuinely think in non-Euclidean space by default, Scholar Caldwell said finally, her 3 arms moving in patterns that suggested fascination. Your brain doesn't translate curved space to Euclidean. It processes curved space directly. I've never seen that before. Is it wrong, Lyra asked? And Toby heard the vulnerability there. It's different. And I spent 40 years teaching as if different was wrong. Scholar Caldwell looked at Toby. Mr. Merrick, I owe you an apology. You weren't undermining education. You were recognizing that Princess Lyra's mind works in ways our assessments weren't designed to measure. You weren't wrong to use assessments, Toby said. You were just using the wrong assessments for her. By day 13, they had something that might actually work. Lyra's presentation combined her practical demonstrations with theoretical frameworks that Dr. Pemberton provided and methodological explanations that Scholar Caldwell helped articulate. It wasn't traditional, but it was comprehensive, demonstrable, and undeniably competent. Then day 14 arrived, and everything changed. Toby sat alone in his quarters that night, staring at assessment data that felt like a verdict he already knew. Scholar Caldwell had been right. Lyra could solve problems brilliantly, could build functional algorithms that would impress professional engineers, could demonstrate practical understanding that exceeded most adults. But she still couldn't articulate theoretical foundations in the language formal assessments demanded. Tomorrow, Dr. Pemberton would present his mid-trial evaluation to Queen Thesara. The data would show progress in practical application, but regression in theoretical articulation. By any traditional metric, Toby's approach was failing. His datapad chimed. A message from Scholar Caldwell. Mr. Merrick, we need to discuss Princess Lyra's formal evaluation performance before tomorrow's review. Please meet me in the observatory, midnight. Midnight meetings were never good news. Toby arrived to find Scholar Caldwell standing at the massive windows overlooking Celestia Prime's night landscape. Her three arms were still, her harmonic voice quiet when she spoke. I've been teaching for 40 years, Mr. Merrick. Do you know how many students I've taught to question methodology? I'm guessing not many. 0. She turned to face him, and in the dim light, he saw something in her expression he hadn't expected. Uncertainty. I've spent 4 decades perfecting pedagogical approaches designed to produce specific, measurable outcomes, standardized excellence, replicable results. And then you arrive with no training, no methodology, no framework, and Princess Lyra learns more in 2 weeks than she learned in 6 months with me. She learns differently. That's not your fault, isn't it? Scholar Caldwell's three arms moved in agitated patterns. I'm watching an 8-year-old child build cargo optimization algorithms that utilize advanced gravitational mechanics. She can't define what a gravitational well is according to standard physics terminology, but she can calculate fuel efficiency through one with 97% accuracy. By every formal assessment, she's failing theoretical foundations. By every practical measure, she understands more deeply than students twice her age. So which metric matters more? That's the question, isn't it? Scholar Caldwell moved to a nearby console, pulling up holographic displays of Lyra's work. Tomorrow, Dr. Pemberton and I will present our evaluation to Queen Thesara. The data will show that Princess Lyra has made unprecedented progress in practical application, but cannot pass standardized theoretical assessments. Dr. Pemberton will recommend ending the trial period early. Toby's stomach dropped. And you? I don't know. Scholar Caldwell's harmonic voice carried notes Toby had never heard before. Doubt, frustration, something that might have been hope. I've built my entire career on the premise that proper education follows established frameworks, that theoretical foundations must precede practical application, that standardized assessment ensures consistent quality. And then I watch Princess Lyra solve problems using methodologies I've never seen. And I wonder if I've spent 40 years teaching students to think like me instead of teaching them to think. You've taught them to pass assessments. That's what you were asked to do. But was it what they needed? Scholar Caldwell looked at him with all her multiple eyes. Be honest, Mr. Merrick. Do you think Princess Lyra will be able to present to the Meridian delegation in a way that satisfies formal diplomatic expectations? Toby thought about cargo optimization algorithms and harmonic resonance, and an 8-year-old who'd walked out of an evaluation because she was tired of being told her understanding was wrong. No, he admitted, not if diplomatic expectations require her to sound like everyone else. But I think she can demonstrate understanding that goes deeper than formal presentations usually reach. Whether that's enough, he shrugged. I don't know. I'm hoping it is. Hope is a poor foundation for education. Maybe, but maybe it's a better foundation than certainty that there's only one right way to understand things. Scholar Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, her three arms moving through patterns that looked almost like prayer. Tomorrow's evaluation will likely end your trial period, Mr. Merrick. I thought you should know. Will you recommend they end it? I'm going to recommend, Scholar Caldwell said slowly, that we're measuring the wrong things. I don't know if that will be enough. After she left, Toby stood at the observatory windows, watching Celestia Prime's twin moons paint silver patterns across the palace gardens. Somewhere in those gardens, Lyra was probably still awake, probably still working on algorithms and calculations, probably still trying to figure out how to make her understanding fit into frameworks designed for different kinds of minds. He pulled out his data pad and started typing. Lyra, tomorrow might not go well. Dr. Pemberton is probably going to recommend I leave. Scholar Caldwell is reconsidering centuries of teaching methodology, which is amazing, but probably won't happen fast enough to save us. So here's what I need you to know. You're not failing, not even a little bit. You understand things deeply and beautifully in ways that most people never reach. The problem isn't your understanding. The problem is that the assessments are too small to measure what you actually know. If they send me away, keep asking questions. Keep building things. Keep demanding that people explain why your way is wrong instead of just accepting that it is. Because from where I'm sitting, your way works brilliantly. You chose me without hesitation. That meant something then, and it means something now, even if the trial period ends tomorrow. Don't stop being yourself just because the assessments can't figure out how to measure you. Toby, he sent it, then sat in the observatory until dawn, watching stars he couldn't name, paint patterns across the sky he was only beginning to understand. The formal review chamber was even more intimidating than Toby remembered. Queen Thesara sat elevated at the center, her expression carefully neutral. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell occupied positions to her right. Ambassador Whitmore stood to the left. And Toby sat in what felt uncomfortably like a defendant's chair, watching his trial period possibly end 9 days early. Dr. Pemberton, Queen Thesara said, your evaluation. Dr. Pemberton activated holographic displays with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced this presentation multiple times. Your Majesty, over the past 2 weeks, we have conducted comprehensive assessments across multiple disciplines. Princess Lyra has demonstrated progress in practical problem-solving ability. However, the display shifted to show graphs trending downward in red. She has regressed significantly in theoretical articulation, formal assessment performance, and standardized evaluation metrics. By established pedagogical standards, Mr. Merrick's approach is producing measurable harm to the princess's educational development. Toby watched the data scroll past. By traditional metrics, Dr. Pemberton was right. Lyra's test scores had dropped. Her ability to recite proper definitions had decreased. Her formal presentation skills showed minimal improvement. Mr. Merrick, Queen Thesara said, do you dispute these findings? No, Your Majesty. By traditional metrics, Princess Lyra is failing. Dr. Pemberton looked satisfied. Scholar Caldwell looked conflicted. Ambassador Whitmore looked resigned. However, Toby continued, I dispute that traditional metrics are measuring what actually matters. Please explain. Toby stood, moving to the holographic displays. May I? Queen Thesara nodded. Toby pulled up different data, files Lyra had created over the past 2 weeks. Princess Lyra has built a functional cargo optimization algorithm that calculates fuel efficiency through gravitational wells with 97% accuracy. She's developed harmonic resonance models for orbital mechanics that professional Earth engineers would struggle to create. She's synthesized practical applications of quantum entanglement that demonstrate understanding far beyond theoretical recitation. He manipulated the displays, showing Lyra's work in detail. She can't define a gravitational well using standard physics terminology, but she can use one to save millions in fuel costs. She can't recite classical economic theory, but she can apply it to real trade routes in ways that show genuine comprehension. By every practical measure, she understands more deeply than the assessments can capture. But she cannot articulate this understanding in formal contexts, Dr. Pemberton said, which means she cannot demonstrate it to diplomatic observers who expect traditional presentations. Unless, Scholar Caldwell interjected, and everyone turned to look at her, we allow her to demonstrate understanding through application rather than recitation. Dr. Pemberton's long ears tilted back sharply. Scholar Caldwell, you cannot seriously be suggesting we abandon established assessment frameworks. I'm suggesting, Scholar Caldwell said, her 3 arms moving in emphatic patterns, that I've spent 40 years teaching students to pass assessments, and Mr. Merrick has spent 2 weeks teaching Princess Lyra to actually understand. And I'm not certain my approach is superior. The room went silent. Queen Thesara leaned forward slightly. Scholar Caldwell, you're recommending we continue the trial period? I'm recommending, Your Majesty, that we're measuring the wrong things. Princess Lyra may fail every formal assessment we give her, but she can build things, solve things, demonstrate things that show understanding beyond what standardized tests capture. If the Meridian delegation requires traditional presentation, she paused, then perhaps we need to reconsider what we're presenting. Dr. Pemberton stood. This is pedagogically irresponsible. We cannot restructure centuries of educational tradition based on 2 weeks of unconventional. The door opened. Lyra walked in. She shouldn't have been there. This was a formal review, educators and Queen only. But she walked in anyway, small and determined, carrying a data pad. Mother, she said, and Toby heard the formal term that she rarely used. I have something to show you. Queen Thesara's expression remained neutral, but Toby saw her ears tilt forward slightly. Princess, this is a private evaluation. About me, so I should be here. Lyra moved to the holographic display, connecting her data pad. Dr. Pemberton is right. I'm failing his assessments. I can't define terms properly. I can't explain theories the way Scholar Caldwell wants. I can't present formally the way Ambassador Whitmore expects. She activated her data pad. A holographic model filled the center of the room, a complete three-dimensional representation of Meridian trade routes with real-time calculations of fuel efficiency, gravitational well navigation, and cargo optimization. But I can show you what I understand. Lyra began manipulating the model, walking everyone through her algorithm. She didn't use formal terminology. She didn't recite theoretical frameworks. She just explained in her own language, using music metaphors and harmonic resonance and curved space interpretation, exactly how interstellar trade logistics worked. It was brilliant. It was unconventional. It was undeniably, inarguably, demonstrably competent. When she finished, the room was silent. This is what Toby taught me, Lyra said quietly. Not to think like you. To think like myself, deeply enough that I can show you what I understand even if I can't say it the way you want to hear it. She looked at her mother. The Meridian delegation arrives in 9 days. If they need me to recite definitions and formal theory, I'll fail. But if they need me to demonstrate that I actually understand how trade works, that I can build things and solve things and apply knowledge in ways that matter, then I think I can do that. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it isn't. But it's the truth about what I know. Queen Thesara stood, moving closer to the holographic model. She examined it in silence, her long ears tilting through positions Toby couldn't interpret. Finally, she spoke. Dr. Pemberton, Scholar Caldwell, Ambassador Whitmore, you've given me your evaluations. Now I'm giving you mine. She turned to face them. My daughter has learned more in 2 weeks with Mr. Merrick than in 6 months of traditional instruction. Not because his methodology is superior, but because he asked her what she wanted to understand instead of telling her what she should know. I'm inclined to continue the trial period through its full 30 days. Dr. Pemberton opened his mouth to protest, but Queen Thesara raised a hand. However, she continued, Princess Lyra is correct that the Meridian delegation arrives in 9 days. And they will expect a formal presentation that demonstrates theoretical grounding, not just practical application. So here is my decision. Mr. Merrick remains as primary companion. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell, you will work with Mr. Merrick to help Princess Lyra translate her understanding into language the Meridian delegation will recognize, not by abandoning her approach, but by building bridges between her methodology and formal expectations. She looked at Lyra. My daughter, you have 9 days to prepare a presentation that shows both what you understand and how you understand it. Can you do this? With help, Lyra said, looking at Toby. Yes, Queen Thesara nodded. Then I suggest you all begin. This evaluation is concluded. The next 5 days blurred together in a montage of work that felt both exhausting and exhilarating. Toby watched as something remarkable happened. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell, faced with the reality that Lyra genuinely understood complex concepts even if she couldn't articulate them traditionally, began actually listening to her explanations instead of correcting them. You keep using musical metaphors for orbital mechanics, Dr. Pemberton said on day 17, his frustration evident, but his tone less dismissive than before. Wait, because that's how I hear it, Lyra explained, her hands moving as she tried to make him understand. Different orbits have different rhythms. When the rhythms match, the gravitational forces balance. It's like harmony. When voices harmonize, they're following mathematical relationships even if the singers don't know the math. Orbits are the same. They're following mathematical relationships that sound like music in my head. Dr. Pemberton was quiet for a moment. Then, that's called harmonic resonance. It's actually a legitimate physical principle. If you're going to use it in your presentation, you'll need to reference the theoretical foundations so the meridian delegation understands you're not just making metaphors, you're describing actual physics. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was progress. Scholar Caldwell proved more adaptable. On day 18, she sat with Lyra for 3 hours, asking question after question about how Lyra processed information. Not correcting, just listening, understanding. You genuinely think in non-Euclidean space by default, Scholar Caldwell said finally, her 3 arms moving in patterns that suggested fascination. Your brain doesn't translate curved space to Euclidean. It processes curved space directly. That's extraordinary. I've never encountered this before. Is it wrong? Lyra asked, vulnerability clear in her voice. It's different, and I spent 40 years teaching as if different was wrong. Scholar Caldwell looked at Toby. Mister Merrick, I owe you an apology. You weren't undermining education. You were recognizing that Princess Lyra's mind works in ways our assessments weren't designed to measure. You weren't wrong to use assessments, Toby said. You were just using the wrong assessments for her specific way of thinking. By day 20, they had something that might actually work. Lyra's presentation combined her practical demonstrations with theoretical frameworks that Dr. Pemberton provided and methodological explanations that Scholar Caldwell helped articulate. It wasn't traditional, but it was comprehensive, demonstrable, and undeniably competent. That evening, Toby found Lyra in the gardens again, sitting by the fountain where he'd fixed her grandmother's music box all those months ago. Nervous? He asked, settling beside her on the fountain's edge. Terrified, she admitted, her fingers tracing patterns on the stone. What if the Meridian delegation doesn't care about practical understanding? What if they only want formal recitation? Then we'll find out together if practical understanding is actually worth more than formal recitation. That's not very reassuring. No, Toby agreed, but it's honest. Lyra was quiet for a moment, listening to her grandmother's music box, which she'd brought to the garden. The melody wove through the evening air, delicate and precise. Toby, why did you stay? Really? You could have left after the first week. Nobody would have blamed you. Toby thought about the question honestly. You asked me once why I explain things to machines, remember? You said it helps you think. But you asked like it mattered, like you genuinely wanted to understand why, not just make small talk. That's rare, Lyra. Most people don't ask questions they actually want answers to. You do, every time. And I stayed because someone who asks real questions deserves someone who tries to give real answers. Lyra leaned against his shoulder. In 4 days, we'll know if that was enough. Yeah, Toby said, watching the twin moons rise over Celestia Prime. We will. Then came day 21, and the message that changed everything. Ambassador Whitmore arrived at the educational suite looking grim, her expression carrying news before she even spoke. The Meridian delegation is arriving early, she said without preamble. Not day 30, day 24, 3 days from now. Toby felt his stomach drop. 3 days? Apparently there's been a change in their diplomatic schedule. They can accommodate Celestia Prime now or not for another 6 months. Queen Thesara agreed to the earlier date. Ambassador Whitmore looked at Lyra. Princess, can you present in 3 days? Lyra looked at Toby. Toby looked at the presentation materials they'd been planning to refine for another week. We can try, Lyra said quietly. Try isn't good enough, Ambassador Whitmore said, but her tone was gentler than her words. The Meridian Coalition is essential to Celestia Prime's trade infrastructure. If this presentation fails, if you appear unprepared or incompetent, it damages diplomatic relationships that have been building for decades. I need to know, can you do this? I can demonstrate what I understand, Lyra said, her voice small but certain. I can show them cargo optimization algorithms and gravitational well navigation and harmonic resonance models. I can prove I understand how trade works, practically and theoretically, whether that's what they want to see. She looked at Ambassador Whitmore directly. I don't know, but it's what I actually know. Ambassador Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then I suggest you spend the next 3 days making sure what you know is enough. After she left, Lyra turned to Toby. 3 days. 3 days, he agreed. Toby, are we going to fail? I don't know, he said honestly, but I know you understand this material better than most adults understand their specialties. So if we fail, it won't be because you didn't know enough. It'll be because the Meridian delegation is measuring the wrong things. That's not very reassuring either. No, Toby said, pulling up the presentation materials on his datapad. But at least it's honest. Now let's get to work. They worked through the night and the next day, and the day after that, refining and practicing until Lyra could deliver the presentation in her sleep. Until she could answer questions about theoretical frameworks while also demonstrating practical applications. Until she could speak in both her own language and the language the Meridian delegation would expect. 3 days had never felt so short, and tomorrow they would find out if it had been enough. The morning of day 22 arrived with the weight of countdown pressure. Toby had slept maybe 3 hours, his mind running through every possible way the presentation could go wrong. When he arrived at the educational suite, he found it had transformed into something resembling a war room. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing trade routes, cargo calculations, gravitational well mappings, and theoretical frameworks that Lyra had spent 3 weeks building and understanding. Dr. Pemberton stood at one display, Scholar Caldwell at another, and Toby paced between them while Lyra sat in the center, looking smaller than ever, surrounded by the enormity of what she was about to attempt. The opening needs to establish theoretical grounding immediately, Doctor, Pemberton said, manipulating a section of Lyra's presentation. His long ears were tilted forward in concentration. The Meridian delegation will expect formal acknowledgement of classical economic principles before any practical demonstration. But if she starts with theory she doesn't fully articulate in their language, she'll lose them in the first 30 seconds, Toby countered. She needs to hook them with what she actually understands, then build the theoretical bridge. Oh, that's pedagogically backwards. Maybe, but it's how her mind works. Scholar Caldwell's 3 arms moved in contemplative patterns, her multiple eyes tracking between the various displays. What if we do both? Princess Lyra begins with a question that frames the presentation, something that acknowledges theory while immediately moving to practical application. Lyra looked up from the data pad she'd been studying. Like what? Like, Scholar Caldwell paused, thinking. Like asking them whether they want to see what you've memorized or what you actually understand. Dr. Pemberton's long ears tilted back sharply. That's dangerously confrontational for a diplomatic presentation. It's honest, Lyra said quietly, and Toby says honesty matters more than performance. In education, perhaps, Dr. Pemberton replied, his tone careful. In diplomacy, performance often matters more than honesty. Then maybe, Lyra said, and Toby heard that edge in her voice that meant she'd made a decision. I'm not very good at diplomacy, but I'm good at understanding how things work, so I'll show them that instead. The 3 adults exchanged glances. Your mother won't appreciate the risk, Dr. Pemberton warned. My mother chose to continue the trial period because she trusted my judgment, Lyra said. I'm choosing to trust Toby's approach. If that's wrong, she looked at Toby. At least it'll be honestly wrong instead of dishonestly right. Toby felt the weight of that trust like a physical thing settling on his shoulders. Okay, then let's build a presentation that's genuinely you, with enough theoretical framework that they can't dismiss it as just practical tinkering. We have 2 days, let's make them count. They worked through lunch, through dinner, through the evening hours when Celestia Prime's twin moons painted silver patterns across the palace gardens, and Toby's Earth-adjusted circadian rhythm insisted he should be sleeping. Dr. Pemberton proved unexpectedly valuable once he stopped trying to restructure Lyra's entire approach and instead focused on providing the theoretical vocabulary she needed. When you talk about orbital rhythms, you're describing resonant frequency matching. Use that term. The Meridian delegation will recognize it as legitimate physics rather than metaphorical thinking. Scholar Caldwell worked on helping Lyra articulate her non-Euclidean spatial processing in language that didn't require the listener to think the same way. You don't need them to understand how you think. You just need them to understand that your thinking produces valid results. Show the outcome, then explain the process in terms they recognize. And Toby? Toby mostly stayed out of the way, offering encouragement and occasionally asking Lyra to explain her thinking when she got stuck on how to translate her understanding into formal language. I don't know how to explain why curved space makes more sense to me, Lyra said, at around hour 7 of continuous work, frustration evident in every line of her small frame. It just does. It's like asking why music sounds like music instead of just mathematical frequency ratios. Then say that, Toby suggested. The Meridian delegation aren't robots. They're people who've spent their entire lives working with trade logistics. They understand that sometimes you just know things work without being able to articulate why in formal terms. Show them you know it works, prove it produces results, then let Dr. Pemberton's theoretical framework give them the vocabulary to accept it. What if it's not enough? Then it's not enough. But Lyra, you've built something in 3 weeks that professional engineers would struggle to create in 3 months. If they can't see that, Toby shrugged, then they're measuring the wrong things, and that's their failure, not yours. Dr. Pemberton cleared his throat, his golden earrings catching the light. Mr. Merrick, while I appreciate your confidence in Princess Lyra's abilities, diplomatic presentations don't grade on curves. Either she meets their expectations or she doesn't. Then let's make sure she exceeds their expectations in ways they weren't expecting to measure, Toby said. Because trying to make her meet traditional expectations is what failed for 6 months before I got here. Maybe it's time to trust that unconventional success is still success. Scholar Caldwell's harmonic voice carried a note that might have been amusement. Dr. Pemberton, I believe Mr. Merrick is suggesting that we've been teaching Princess Lyra to pass tests rather than to demonstrate competence. And he may have a point. Tests exist for a reason, Dr. Pemberton said stiffly. Yes, to measure what we already know how to measure. But Princess Lyra knows things we haven't figured out how to test for yet. Perhaps that's the real presentation, showing the Meridian delegation something they weren't expecting to see. But by midnight, they had a presentation structure that felt both terrifying and potentially brilliant. Lyra would open with a question. Do you want what I'm supposed to say, or what I actually understand? Then demonstrate her cargo optimization algorithm using real Meridian trade routes, building from practical application to theoretical framework, showing not just that it worked, but why it worked in language that bridged her understanding in formal terminology. It was risky. It was unconventional. It was absolutely, undeniably Lyra. 2 more days, Toby said as they finally called it a night. You've got this. Do I? Lyra asked, and she sounded 8 years old and exhausted and scared. Yeah, Toby said, with more confidence than he felt. You do. Day 23 felt different. The panic had settled into focused determination. Lyra knew her material inside and out. The problem was translating it into a 20-minute presentation that would satisfy diplomatic observers who expected traditional academic formats. Ambassador Rosalind Whitmore arrived mid-morning, looking as tired as Toby felt. She pulled up holographic profiles with practiced efficiency. I need to brief you on the Meridian delegation composition, she said. 3 ambassadors. Ambassador Garrett Holloway leads the Trade Logistics Division. He's the one you need to impress. He spent 40 years optimizing interstellar cargo routes. He will know if your algorithms are functional or theoretical nonsense. Lyra studied Holloway's profile, human, heavily augmented with biosynthetic enhancements that gave his eyes a faint glow and his movements an uncanny precision. He looks intimidating. He is, Ambassador Whitmore said bluntly, but he's also fair. If you demonstrate genuine understanding, he'll recognize it. If you're faking or relying on others' work, he'll know that too. She looked at Lyra directly, her expression serious. Princess, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about your education anymore. Celestia Prime's trade relationship with the Meridian Coalition generates economic activity that supports thousands of jobs. If this presentation fails, if you appear unprepared or incompetent, it damages trust that's been building for decades. Can you handle that pressure? Lyra looked at Toby. Toby looked back, offering no easy reassurance because there wasn't any to give. I can show them what I understand, Lyra said finally. I can't promise they'll like how I show them, But I can promise it's real. Is that enough? Ambassador Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but it's all we have, so it'll have to be. After she left, Dr. Pemberton resumed drilling Lyra on theoretical terminology. Scholar Caldwell worked on presentation pacing. And Toby mostly watched, feeling increasingly like a spectator to something he'd set in motion but couldn't control. Around hour 4, Lyra made a mistake. She was explaining gravitational well navigation and accidentally used her musical metaphor instead of the formal physics terminology Dr. Pemberton had taught her. No, Dr. Pemberton corrected sharply. Resonant frequency matching, not rhythmic harmony. The meridian delegation needs precise language, not poetic descriptions. Lyra stopped mid-sentence, her long ears going flat against her head. But rhythmic harmony is how I think about it. And you need to translate how you think into how they think. That's what formal presentations require. So I need to pretend I think like them instead of showing how I actually think. You need to demonstrate competence in language they recognize, even if that language makes my understanding less clear. Dr. Pemberton opened his mouth, then closed it, then looked at Toby with an expression that clearly said, "Help me here." Toby moved closer to Lyra, crouching down so he was at her eye level. What if you use both? Start with the formal terminology so they know you understand it, then explain that you also think about it as rhythmic harmony, because that reveals aspects of the physics that pure mathematical description misses. Can I do that? Why not? You're not wrong about the physics. Harmonic resonance and rhythmic harmony are describing the same phenomenon from different angles. One's mathematical, one's intuitive. But they're both valid, Doctor. Pemberton looked like he was struggling with something internally. Finally, that's actually not incorrect. If you frame it as complementary perspectives rather than competing methodologies, it demonstrates sophisticated understanding rather than imprecise thinking. So I can be myself? Lyra asked, hope creeping into her voice. You can be yourself, Scholar Caldwell said, her 3 arms moving in gentle patterns, while also demonstrating that you understand formal frameworks. That's not pretending, that's translation. They kept working. By evening, Lyra could deliver the entire presentation smoothly, hitting theoretical frameworks, practical demonstrations, and her own unique insights in ways that felt both rigorous and genuine. It wasn't traditional, but it was undeniably competent. One more day, Toby said as they finally stopped for dinner. Tomorrow we just polish. You're ready. Am I? Lyra asked, picking at food she clearly had no appetite for. You know this material better than most professionals know their specialties. Whether the Meridian delegation recognizes that, Toby shrugged. That's on them, not you. That night, Lyra appeared at Toby's quarters long after she should have been asleep. She stood in the doorway, small and uncertain. I'm scared, she said without preamble. Toby let her in, offered her a seat on furniture that was sized for adults, and made her look even smaller. Of failing? Of succeeding? Lyra pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself even smaller. If I fail, everyone says, well, she tried something unconventional. It didn't work. Back to traditional methods. But if I succeed, if I actually demonstrate that thinking differently produces valid results, then she looked at him with eyes too old for her age. Then what happens to everyone else who thinks differently? Do they get the same chance I got? Or was I just lucky because I'm a princess? Toby sat beside her, feeling the weight of the question. That's a really mature question for someone who's supposed to be focused on her own presentation tomorrow. Toby, I'm serious. You taught me that my way of thinking isn't wrong, just different. But Scholar Caldwell spent 40 years teaching students that different was wrong. If I succeed tomorrow, does that mean she wasted 40 years? Does it mean all those students were failed by the system? Lyra's voice shook. That's a lot of responsibility for one presentation. Yeah, Toby agreed. It is. But Lyra, you are not responsible for fixing an entire educational system. You're just responsible for showing what you understand. What people do with that information, whether they recognize it means they need to change their approaches, that's on them, not you. But what if I mess up? What if I get nervous and forget the terminology or use the wrong framework or... Then you mess up, Toby said gently, and we figure out what comes next. But Lyra, listen to me. You have already succeeded. You built functional algorithms that work. You demonstrated understanding that goes deeper than rote memorization. You made Scholar Caldwell question 40 years of teaching methodology, and Dr. Pemberton acknowledge that unconventional doesn't mean incorrect. Whether the Meridian delegation recognizes that tomorrow doesn't change what you've already accomplished. It changes whether you get to stay. Toby felt his chest tighten. Yeah, it does. I don't want you to leave. I don't want to leave either. But Lyra, even if tomorrow goes badly, even if they send me back to Earth, you'll still know how to ask questions. You'll still know that your way of thinking produces valid results. That doesn't go away just because I'm not here. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you regret it? Being chosen, having to deal with all this pressure and evaluation and the possibility of diplomatic incidents? Toby thought about the question honestly. About holographic projectors and music boxes and an 8-year-old who'd pointed at him without hesitation. About 3 weeks of watching someone discover that her understanding mattered even when it didn't look like everyone else's understanding. Every single day, he said. And then you ask a question or solve a problem or look at me like I just explained the most fascinating thing in the universe. And I remember why I stayed. Lyra leaned against his shoulder, her small body warm and trusting. What if that's not enough tomorrow? Then it's not enough, but it's true. And I'd rather fail honestly than succeed by pretending to be something I'm not. I think you feel the same way. Yeah, Lyra whispered. I do. They sat in comfortable silence until Lyra's breathing evened out into sleep. Toby carried her back to her quarters. She was lighter than the equipment he usually hauled around, and tucked her into a bed that probably cost more than his education. Tomorrow would either validate everything or end it all. Either way, he thought, at least they'd done it honestly. Day 24 arrived with the inevitability of gravity and the weight of consequence. The diplomatic reception hall was designed to impress, and it succeeded magnificently. Crystalline walls refracted light in patterns that seemed almost alive, creating shifting rainbows that moved across the floor like conscious things. Floating platforms held seats arranged in semicircular tiers, allowing clear sight lines to the central presentation area. The ceiling displayed a real-time star map of local space, with Celestia Prime and the Meridian systems highlighted in gentle pulses of light. Toby stood in the back, far from the presentation platform where Lyra would speak. Queen Thesara had been clear. This was Lyra's moment. Toby's presence should be felt, but not seen. The Meridian delegation arrived with the precision of people who'd spent their entire lives optimizing efficiency. 3 ambassadors, each representing different aspects of the coalition's interests, but all attention focused on the lead figure, Ambassador Garrett Holloway. Toby had reviewed Holloway's profile so many times he could recite it from memory. 63 Earth years old, 40 years in interstellar trade logistics, biosynthetic enhancements that gave him processing power that made baseline humans look like they were thinking through molasses. He'd optimized 17 major trade routes, saved the Meridian Coalition an estimated 3 trillion credits over his career, and had a reputation for suffering fools not at all. Holloway's eyes, enhanced with optical implants that glowed faintly blue, scanned the room with the precision of someone cataloging everything for later analysis. When his gaze passed over Toby, there was a moment of assessment, calculation, and then dismissal. If Lyra impressed Holloway, the presentation would succeed. If she didn't, nothing else mattered. The delegation took their seats on one of the floating platforms. Queen Thesara offered formal greetings, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd done this 1,000 times but still made it sound genuine. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell sat in the educator section, both looking like they were attending an execution rather than a presentation. And then Lyra walked out. She looked impossibly small on the central platform. 8 years old, wearing formal Celestian attire that shimmered with embedded light threads, diplomatic significance Toby didn't fully understand but knew represented something important. Her long ears were tilted forward in determined focus, but he could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She looked at the assembled delegation, looked at her mother, looked back toward where Toby stood in the shadows, and even though he knew she probably couldn't see him from the presentation platform's lighting, he raised his hand in a small gesture of encouragement. Then she took a breath and began. Ambassador Holloway, honored delegates, Your Majesty, Lyra said, her young voice clear and steady, despite the slight tremor he could hear underneath. I've been studying interstellar trade logistics for 3 weeks. My teachers prepared me to give you a formal presentation demonstrating theoretical understanding of classical economic principles, spatial mechanics, and cargo optimization frameworks. She paused and Toby's heart stopped. But before I do that, I need to ask you a question. Do you want to hear what I've memorized, or do you want to see what I actually understand? The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder. Toby saw Dr. Pemberton's ears flatten completely against his head. Scholar Caldwell's 3 arms went still. Ambassador Whitmore looked like she was calculating the diplomatic fallout in real time. Ambassador Holloway's biosynthetic eyes glowed slightly brighter, processing, analyzing. The optical implants created faint patterns of light across his enhanced irises. Then he spoke, his voice modulated through translation matrices that made every word sound like it had been calculated for maximum efficiency. The latter, if you please, Princess. Lyra smiled. It was small, nervous, but genuine. Thank you. She activated the holographic display, and her cargo optimization algorithm filled the central space. 3-dimensional trade routes materialized in the air. Gravitational well mappings overlaid with fuel efficiency calculations that updated in real time as she manipulated variables with practiced gestures. This is the Meridian Coalition's primary trade route between your home system and the outer territories, Lyra said, highlighting a section of space with a gesture that made the relevant paths glow brighter. Current standard practice calculates fuel requirements based on direct trajectory planning, accounting for gravitational bodies as obstacles to avoid. She zoomed in on a large star system, the holographic representation expanding until individual planets were visible. But gravitational wells are not obstacles. They're opportunities. If you approach them as resonant frequency systems, like musical harmonies, you can use gravitational assists that reduce fuel consumption by approximately 23% while maintaining delivery schedules. Ambassador Holloway leaned forward slightly, his enhanced eyes tracking the calculations that scrolled past in the holographic display. Please elaborate on resonant frequency systems. When 2 orbits achieve harmonic resonance, when their rhythms match, the gravitational interactions become predictable and usable, Lyra explained. She was using her musical metaphor but immediately bridging to formal terminology, just as they'd practiced. In classical physics, this is called resonant frequency matching in coupled oscillator systems. The mathematical framework is well established by the work of, she referenced 3 historical physicists that Dr. Pemberton had made her memorize. But most cargo optimization algorithms don't think about gravitational navigation as a harmony problem. They think about it as a trajectory problem. She manipulated the display, showing the difference in vivid color. Traditional routing appeared in red, avoiding the gravitational wells in wide arcs. Her routing appeared in blue, dancing through the wells in an elegant pattern, using each well's pull to accelerate toward the next in a cascading series of gravity assists that looked almost choreographed. The fuel savings are significant, Lyra continued, pulling up numerical data that filled subsidiary displays around the main visualization. But the real advantage is flexibility. Because this approach treats gravitational fields as complementary systems rather than isolated obstacles, you can adjust for unexpected variables, cargo mass changes, emergency rerouting, temporal constraints, without completely recalculating the entire route. The harmonic resonance framework remains stable even when individual variables change. She looked at Holloway directly, her young face serious. I can't explain all of this using only classical economic theory because I don't think about it in purely economic terms. I think about it in spatial, mechanical, musical terms that happen to produce economically optimal results. Is that okay? Toby held his breath. This was the moment, the point where everything could collapse if Holloway decided that unconventional thinking was the same as incorrect thinking. Holloway's expression was unreadable, his biosynthetic enhancements making his face almost mask-like. The optical implants in his eyes brightened further, processing enormous amounts of data. Princess Lyra, show me the fuel efficiency calculations for the route you've displayed. Lyra pulled up the data without hesitation, her small hands moving through the holographic interface with confidence. Current standard routing, 2.7 million liters of fuel equivalent per standard cargo load. My harmonic resonance routing, 2.08 million liters. That's 22.96% reduction, which at current fuel cost represents approximately 17 million credits saved per round trip. Show me the temporal analysis. Does this routing maintain delivery schedules? It improves them by 6% because the gravity assists provide consistent acceleration that doesn't require compensatory burns that add temporal variability to arrival windows. She pulled up timeline comparisons showing how her routing actually reduced delivery time variance. Show me the mass distribution calculations. Lyra did, walking Holloway through cargo loading algorithms that optimize for gravitational assist efficiency rather than just spatial efficiency. She explained how placing heavier cargo toward the stern of the vessel actually improved the harmonic resonance patterns during the gravity assists. For 15 minutes, Holloway asked question after question, diving deeper into the technical details. His enhanced eyes glowed continuously as he processed the information, comparing it against his own 4 decades of experience. Lyra answered every one, sometimes using formal terminology, sometimes using her own frameworks, always demonstrating that she understood not just the what, but the why. The other 2 Meridian ambassadors watched in silence, occasionally making notes on their own datapads, but clearly deferring to Holloway's expertise. Finally, Holloway sat back in his seat, his optical implants dimming slightly. Princess Lyra, who designed this curriculum? This was the moment. Toby could see Lyra's ears tilt slightly back, nervousness, before she answered. I did, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Mr. Merrick helped me with the physics frameworks I didn't understand. Scholar Caldwell provided theoretical grounding. Dr. Pemberton explained the historical economic context. But I wanted to understand how trade actually works, not just what textbooks say about it. So I built this to figure it out for myself. And the harmonic resonance approach? Was that taught to you? Mr. Merrick mentioned that orbital mechanics could be understood through harmonic resonance. But thinking about it musically, hearing the rhythms of different orbits, that's just how my brain works. He didn't teach me to think that way. He taught me it was okay to think that way and then show my work. Holloway turned to Queen Thesara. Your Majesty, I was skeptical when we heard about your daughter's unconventional education. The Meridian Coalition has strict standards for diplomatic competence, and we were prepared for this presentation to be a diplomatic formality before declining further engagement. Toby felt his stomach drop. Here it came, the diplomatic rejection, the failure that would end the trial period and send him back to Earth and prove that unconventional thinking couldn't survive contact with real-world expectations. However, Holloway continued, and Toby's heart restarted, what Princess Lyra has demonstrated is not mere unconventional thinking. It's practical wisdom grounded in theoretical understanding, presented in a framework that shows genuine comprehension rather than rote memorization. The Meridian Coalition values results over methodology. Your daughter's approach produces demonstrably superior results to methods we've been using for decades. He stood, and the other 2 Meridian ambassadors stood with him. I would like to propose that Princess Lyra's cargo optimization algorithm be reviewed by our logistics division for potential implementation across Meridian Coalition trade routes. If the results scale as presented, and my preliminary analysis suggests they will, we're looking at fuel cost reductions that could save billions of credits annually across our entire trade network. The room was silent. Toby could hear his own heartbeat. Then Queen Thesara stood, her expression controlled, but her ears tilted forward in what Toby had learned was pleasure. Ambassador Holloway, the coalition honors us with this recognition. We would be pleased to facilitate such a review. Additionally, Holloway said, his biosynthetic eyes glowing as he turned to look directly at where Toby stood in the shadows. I would like to know more about the educational methodology that produced this outcome. The Meridian Coalition trains thousands of logistics specialists. If Mr. Merrick's approach to teaching, asking students what they want to understand rather than telling them what they should know, can produce 8-year-olds who design optimization algorithms that improve upon my 40 years of experience. He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his enhanced features. Perhaps we've been teaching wrong as well. The reception continued with formal pleasantries and diplomatic protocols that Toby mostly ignored. He watched Lyra on the platform, surrounded by adults who were now treating her like someone whose ideas mattered, and felt something in his chest that might have been pride, mixed with relief, mixed with the realization that his job here was essentially done. She'd succeeded, not by conforming to expectations, but by demonstrating that her different way of thinking produced results that mattered. Queen Thesara approached him as the delegation began to depart. "Mr. Merrick, a word." They stepped into a side chamber, leaving the continuing reception behind. "My daughter exceeded every expectation today," Thesara said without preamble. "She demonstrated competence that I frankly did not believe an 8-year-old could achieve. She's remarkable, Your Majesty. I just got out of her way and let her show what she already knew." "No, you did something more difficult than that." Thesara moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. "You convinced her that her way of thinking was valid, that understanding doesn't have to look the same for everyone. That's—" She paused. "That's something I needed her to learn, and I didn't know how to teach it." She turned back to him. "The trial period was 30 days. We're only on day 24. However, I believe we've seen enough to make a permanent decision." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Merrick, I would like you to remain as Princess Lyra's primary companion. Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell will continue as supplementary educators, providing theoretical frameworks in historical context. But your approach of asking what she wants to understand before telling her what she should know will become foundational to her education. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I don't have formal qualifications. I'm just the person my daughter chose without hesitation," Thesara interrupted. "And she chose well, better than I could have planned." She smiled slightly. "The music box you repaired. She told me it sounds better than when it was new because you understood what the music wanted to be. I think you did the same for her education." The private chamber where they had all gathered after the reception, Toby, Lyra, Queen Thesara, Dr. Pemberton, Scholar Caldwell, and Ambassador Whitmore, felt different than it had on that first day. Less like a judgment room, more like a place where people who'd learned something gathered to figure out what came next. Dr. Pemberton stood when Toby entered, and his long ears were tilted fully forward. "Respect." "Mr. Merrick, I owe you an apology." "You don't." "I do, Doctor." Pemberton's voice was formal but genuine, the golden rings on his ears catching the light. "I spent 2 years preparing to teach Princess Lyra according to methods I believe were unquestionably correct. You spent 3 weeks asking her questions, and she demonstrated understanding that exceeded anything I achieved in 2 years. I was wrong to dismiss you. More than that, I was wrong to assume that centuries of methodology couldn't be improved upon." "You weren't wrong to use established methodology," Toby said carefully. "You were just using it with someone whose mind works differently than the methodology anticipated." "Which suggests," Scholar Caldwell added, her 3 arms moving in contemplative patterns, "that perhaps our methodologies need to be more flexible, more adaptive to different kinds of minds." She looked at Toby with all her multiple eyes. "Mr. Merrick, in 40 years of teaching, I have never had a student explain non-Euclidean geometry through musical metaphors and have it be not just correct, but superior to traditional explanations. I thought I was teaching Princess Lyra to think properly. You taught her it was acceptable to think like herself. That's what I forgot, somewhere in 40 years of standardized assessments and established protocols. That proper thinking looks different for different minds." Ambassador Whitmore stepped forward. "I'll be honest, Mr. Merrick. 3 weeks ago, I thought this was a disaster waiting to happen. A political embarrassment that would set back Celestia Prime's diplomatic relationships by years." She glanced at Lyra, who was listening quietly. "I was wrong. What Princess Lyra demonstrated today wasn't just competent. It was extraordinary. And it happened because you didn't try to make her be like everyone else." Queen Thesara, who'd been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Dr. Pemberton, Scholar Caldwell, you will continue as supplementary educators. But Mr. Merrick's approach of asking what Princess Lyra wants to understand before telling her what she should know will become foundational. We're not replacing your expertise. We're building on it with something we were missing." She looked at Lyra. "My daughter, you've had a long day. Go rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss your new internship with the Meridian Coalition and what it means for your schedule. Lyra hugged her mother in a quick, fierce embrace, then surprised Toby by hugging him as well. Her small arms wrapped around his waist, and he heard her whisper, "Thank you for staying." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving the adults in contemplative silence. "She will outgrow needing you eventually," Queen Thesara said to Toby after the others had left. "You understand that?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "But for now, she needs someone who sees her mind as it is, rather than how it should be. That's rarer than you might think." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The music box you repaired. She told me it sounds better than when it was new because you understood what the music wanted to be. I think you did the same for her education. Thank you." Toby found Lyra in the Eastern Gardens that evening, sitting beside the fountain where everything had somehow started with a broken music box and a question about why he talked to machines. She was holding the music box now, listening to its delicate mechanisms with an expression of pure contentment. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Too much happened today. My brain won't stop thinking about gravitational harmonics and what Ambassador Holloway said about implementation and whether I can actually do an internship while also doing regular education." And she trailed off. "Everything. That's a lot." "Yeah." Lyra picked up a small stone, examining it with the focus she brought to everything. "Toby, do you regret being chosen?" "Every single day," Toby said. The answer automatic now and completely honest. "And then you do something like explain orbital mechanics through musical metaphors to a man who spent 40 years thinking he understood optimization. And I remember why I stayed. Because I asked good questions? Because you ask real questions. Questions you actually want answers to, not questions you think you should ask. That's rare, Lyra, even among adults." Lyra tossed the stone into the fountain, watching ripples disturb the carefully programmed water patterns. "What happens now?" "Now you keep learning, keep asking questions, keep building things that show what you understand. Keep being yourself even when people want you to be something else." "Will you stay?" "As long as you need me to, or until your mother decides I'm a bad influence." Toby smiled, "Though after today, I think I might have bought myself a little credibility." "Ambassador Holloway wants to learn from me. From an 8-year-old. That's weird, right? It's unconventional. But so are you. And today you proved that unconventional can still be excellent, can still be better than 40 years of conventional thinking." Lyra was quiet for a moment, listening to her grandmother's music box. The melody wove through the evening air, delicate and precise, and somehow more beautiful for being slightly imperfect. The imperfection that came from being repaired with care rather than replaced with precision. "Think they'll ever stop being surprised that I chose you?" she asked. "Probably not," Toby said. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes the best choices are the ones that surprise everyone, including yourself." They sat in comfortable silence as Celestia Prime's twin moons rose over the palace, painting everything in shades of silver and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, internships in education and diplomatic relationships that had somehow become entangled with an 8-year-old's ability to think differently. But tonight, in a garden where a broken music box had led to an impossible choice that had led to everything else, Toby felt something that might have been peace. Lyra had chosen him without hesitation, and somehow, impossibly, that unhesitating choice had turned into something that mattered. "Come on," Toby said finally, standing and offering his hand. "I need to recalibrate the atmospheric processors in the East Wing, and you wanted to learn about fluid dynamics. We can talk about how airflow patterns relate to gravitational harmonics." "Everything relates to gravitational harmonics, if you think about it right," Lyra said, taking his hand and grinning. "See, that's exactly the kind of statement that's going to make Scholar Caldwell question another 40 years of teaching methodology." "Good," Lyra said. "Maybe she'll learn something." They walked back toward the palace together, a princess and an engineer, talking about how things worked while the rest of Celestia Prime settled into evening. Above them, stars that neither could name painted patterns across the sky they were both still learning to understand. Some questions didn't have immediate answers. Some understanding took time to articulate. Some choices surprised everyone, including the people making them. But sometimes, Toby thought, paying attention to what actually matters produces results that no amount of traditional methodology could anticipate. Lyra had pointed at him without hesitation, and everything that followed had proven she'd seen something worth choosing. Several weeks later, the educational suite had transformed into something that actually felt like a workspace where ideas happened. The formal seating was gone, replaced by comfortable cushions and low tables covered with holographic displays, data pads, and the organized chaos of active learning. Toby was helping Lyra debug a section of code for her Meridian Coalition internship project when Dr. Pemberton and Scholar Caldwell arrived together. "Mr. Merrick, Doctor," Pemberton said, his long ears tilted forward in that expression Toby had learned meant he was about to say something that made him uncomfortable. "We've been consulting with Queen Thesara about Princess Lyra's long-term educational planning." "Okay," Toby said carefully, not sure where this was going. "And we wanted to inform you," Scholar Caldwell added, her three arms moving in formal patterns, "that we've recommended restructuring the entire Celestian Royal Education program based on your methodology." Toby blinked. "My what now?" "Your approach of asking students what they want to understand before telling them what they should know," Dr. Pemberton explained, and there was something in his voice that might have been excitement. "It's being implemented as foundational pedagogy for all future royal education. We're calling it the Inquisitive Framework, though Scholar Caldwell wanted to call it the Merrick methodology, which I felt was too informal for official documentation." "I just ask questions," Toby said, feeling overwhelmed. "That's not a methodology, that's just paying attention." "It's not what you did," Scholar Caldwell said gently, her harmonic voice carrying warmth. "It's what you didn't do. You didn't assume you knew better than Princess Lyra what she needed to learn. You didn't insist on frameworks that didn't match her thinking. You didn't try to fix what wasn't broken. That absence of assumption, that's the methodology. That's what we're trying to teach other educators." "Or in simpler terms," Lyra interjected, looking up from her code with a grin, "you treated me like a person instead of a problem. And apparently that's revolutionary enough to restructure education around." Dr. Pemberton actually smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern features. "Perhaps it shouldn't be revolutionary, but it is, and we're attempting to learn from our mistakes before another generation of students is taught that different thinking is wrong thinking." After they left, Lyra returned to her debugging, fingers moving across the holographic interface with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You changed education for an entire planet," Toby observed, still processing what had just happened. "You changed it," Lyra corrected without looking up. "I just demonstrated that it needed changing. By being yourself. By being allowed to be myself." Lyra fixed a syntax error, ran the optimization again, and smiled as the numbers improved. "That's the difference. Everyone before you told me who I should be. You asked who I was. Turns out that was the question that mattered." Outside the windows, Celestia Prime rotated through its afternoon, the twin moons visible even in daylight, hanging like possibilities in a sky that seemed larger than it had a month ago. Toby thought about music boxes and broken equipment and an 8-year-old who'd pointed at him without hesitation. Thought about trial periods and diplomatic presentations and the way sometimes the most important thing you can teach someone is that they don't need to be taught, just listened to. "Next question," Lyra said, already moving on to the next problem with the relentless curiosity that had driven everything. "If we optimize fuel routing through harmonic resonance, can we apply the same principle to information packet routing through quantum networks?" "I have no idea," Toby admitted. "Good," Lyra said, her grin widening. "Then we'll figure it out together." And they did. The story of Princess Lyra and Toby Merrick continued in their ongoing work together, but this particular chapter of an impossible choice, an unconventional education, and the discovery that different thinking could still be excellent thinking, had found its resolution. She had chosen it without hesitation, and he had proven that sometimes the best response to being chosen is simply to pay attention and ask the right questions. The music box still played in the gardens every evening, sounding better than new because someone had understood what the music wanted to be. And somewhere in the palace, an 8-year-old princess was rewriting the rules of education by simply being allowed to be herself. That, Toby thought, was worth more than any methodology could measure.